Good evening from Tri-Sports in sunny Tucson. My name is David Tilbury-Davis. I'm a triathlon coach. Been coaching about 20 years now, and Seaton and Debbie here at Tri-Sports have provided me with the opportunity to really just sort of share my coaching experience and talk about this idea of success rooted in knowledge. For those of you that haven't heard of me, I've been in the sport about 20 years. I've worked with athletes at varying standards, predominantly elite athletes in the past few years and professional athletes. So at the moment, I'm working with folks like Cody Beals, Leslie Smith, Lionel Sanders, Justin Rossi, to name a few. And in the past, I've worked with athletes like Matt Hansen, Corin Abraham, athletes at the Commonwealth Games, and also athletes that are professional mountain bikers and road racers. So the history that I have is I first started coaching back at a place called Luck University, which is now where British Triathlon are based. So I was fortunate to be immersed in a very high level of physical ability in athletes and very early on. My lane one was led by Richard Stannard, who was quite a famous ITU racer, and my lane two, Jessica Harrison, who for many years raced for France. So it was a real baptism of fire. Over the years, I've worked with different clubs in the UK and then based in Spain and now based in the US in Texas. So this idea of success rooted in knowledge, I'm very unapologetic about the importance of striving to justify your methods. I think any coach almost lives a bipolar existence of, on the one hand, when you have success with athletes, you sort of have a vicarious sensation of success, and on the other hand, you're also constantly questioning, what could we do better? How could we do things better? Why is X working and why is Y not working? Those kind of things. And I think it's really important to understand as an athlete and coach, you should always be striving to find the logic and the reasoning behind the progress that you're having and the process that you have in place. I think in coaching and in training, there is no place for faith or intuition in its purest sense. I think also as well is really trying to understand the cause and effect. The reality is, a good, consistent amount of training can put you in a position to be a healthier individual, live a healthier lifestyle, enjoy a fantastic sporting community like the one you have here in Tucson, and it can also provide the opportunity for a great deal of performance-orientated success. But you really need to understand why is that happening. And on the flip side of that, what you're also from my point of view, you're also fighting is this idea of fundamentalism, both in the sporting industry and coaching industries across strength and conditioning, track and field. There's an unfortunate example this week where the University of Oregon saw a whole bunch of its football players hospitalized through the application of less than sound principles. So really, you're trying to make sure you can sort out the sort of the revolutionary ideas that actually really aren't revolutionary, or we've always done it this way and that's why you should do it. Because again, is it right for you? Is it not right for you? One thing that cropped up recently from a big what they call meta-analysis of injury and training in sport was this realization that actually, by a 5- and 10-fold factor in most cases, the two biggest implications of injury or maladaptation in sport is the training load being inappropriate and the levels of stress. So as a coach, it's important to understand, and as an athlete, it's important to understand that the training that you do, it's not just about the engine or the chassis, or the engine and the chassis, but it's about you as a person. So you're coaching and balancing everything in your life or an athlete's life. And a good example of that might be somebody who has a very highly stressful job, such as a brain surgeon or a CEO of a company. That type of scenario, they might come home, making somebody then do a very cognitively demanding training session is probably not going to be that worthwhile or the best approach to take when they've had a day that's already been really cognitively demanding. So it's understanding that you're coaching the person, not just the engine or chassis. Also as well, it's important to have a sense of, what is the person's motivations? Are they very intrinsically motivated or are they very extrinsically motivated? Absolutely without fail, I look back over the athletes that have been successful with myself. They're all heavily intrinsically motivated. They have a passionate desire to get the best out of themselves, to leave no stone unturned. And that's a common theme when you look at world-class athletes. A good example might be a chap called Sir Chris Hoy, who's won more medals at the Olympics in the velodrome than any other cyclist in British history. And he's renowned for almost winning a gold medal, being on the podium, and already in his head he's thinking, what could I have done better in my start? What could I have done better in my body position? What could I have done better in my tactical attitude in the race? And that's the same principle that you see in world-class elites, is they're not satisfied. It's a journey for them. It's a satisfaction in the process of success. The next thing that you're really looking at is the aspirations. What are you looking to achieve? If it's a sense of better health and better well-being, then that's a good benchmark to have. But if it's Kona qualification or it's winning your age group, that has a very different demand in terms of what's required of your training. And there's no right or wrong answer. The third thing really as a coach is the decision making. Does an athlete want to be simply told what to do, just to go away and execute? And I would argue that's not a great situation to be in, because it's not enabling any athlete to really understand how they're achieving the development that they're achieving. A lot of athletes, you can tell them what to do, but you really only get true buy-in when they understand how to do it themselves. So, actually failing in a session, whether it's on the bike or the run from a skill perspective, or the swim, more importantly, can be really important as a learning tool for the athlete to figure out what's going on themselves. And working with, I have the honour of working with Lionel Sanders at the moment, and that's something that Lionel's really passionate about, is about learning and understanding how to be a better athlete, rather than me telling him do X, do Y. The last thing is the expectations in any coaching relationship is managing those. That it's not a dictatorship, that it is a collaboration. That the reality is that my job is to babysit someone through their journey of success. I have no ownership of their success. It's theirs. And also understanding accountability. It goes without saying that there's an element of accountability between an athlete and a coach. But the reality is, from my point of view with any of my athletes, is that really when they cross the finish line, they only have themselves to hold themselves accountable to, not to myself. Because they need to really understand that when they cross the finish line, can they look themselves in the mirror and say, did I do everything in my power to be the best athlete that I'm capable of being? And if the answer to that is no, then both of us are going away and doing some homework, or one of us is. One aspect that, as an athlete, and that never sometimes gets picked up on is really as a coach, our job is to be much like a clock. This analogy comes from a coach called Rod Illingworth in the UK, a cycling coach. And he makes the point, the job of a good coach is to think in seconds, minutes and hours in real time about physiology, psychology, biomechanics, neurology, short term, long term. We're doing that in real time. And as an athlete, sometimes it can be very difficult. You get wrapped up in the short term. You're just thinking on the seconds. Like, I did this one session. it didn't go well, my entire season's over. And that's not the reality. It's having a sense of perspective, and that's what any good coach is doing, is providing some objectivity at 10,000 feet and at 3 feet altitude. From an evidence-based perspective, that's the key for me, is really the approach that I take is very evidence-led. And you'll forgive me because this is a busy slide, so it's one for me to kind of glance at. But any good coach should really be constantly questioning how could we do things better in the same way that an athlete does. You should be looking to learn from various places. So, you know, the idea of being evidence-led is taking knowledge from many places, yourself included, or the athlete, along with other sources, and then providing yourself with a much better view and a much better ability to make objective decisions. So you might have research-based evidence. Some people would bracket that and say science, and that science is pushing back against the art of coaching, and I don't really think that's the case. I think good coaches are a blend of both, in understanding that there is research out there, and at a very high level you have what they call a randomized controlled trial meta-analysis, which is looking at many studies and drawing a conclusion based on all of those studies. Or you have a very simplistic view, which is a one-off case study. One patient came into a doctor's office with one condition, and they found something that was of relevance. It's also important to look in, outside of triathlon, outside of swimming, outside of biking, outside of running. I think any good coach is looking to learn from coaches across many sports. Any good athlete is looking to learn from athletes across a broad spectrum. In the US, you have the major sports, but you also have a wealth of knowledge in strength and conditioning and track and field. And I think that's important to seek out the commonalities that carry across just our sport. And then you've got within our sport as well is seeking out mentors. That's something that I've provided to other coaches, and I've also turned to other coaches and asked their opinion. I think that's also important when you're looking to get the best out of an athlete. As a coach, you should know the limits of what you know and what you're capable of. I'm not a dietitian. If somebody came to me and said, I have celiac disease, but I'm training for an Ultraman, I can provide them with wisdom on nutrition, but it would be better to turn to a dietitian, and that collaboration is important, much in the same way that collaborating with somebody, say, in strength and conditioning, or that has more experience, or a swim coach, or a run coach. I've been fortunate to, over time, be in touch and work with some pretty talented coaches, and the reality is that when you get to a certain point as a coach, it's very much about just sharing the knowledge, because there is no panacea to success. If there was, there'd probably be a coach out there that's a multi-millionaire, and there isn't. So there is no one right answer. There is simply what's right for this athlete at this point in time in their athletic history. And then you have the athlete. The athlete can tell you a lot based on their physiology, their circumstances, what their values are, what they're passionate about, what their preferences are, their motivations, and their athletic age. If somebody's been involved in triathlon for 17 years, you're going to come at things very differently compared to an adult onset triathlete who's maybe only been doing sport for 3 years. And then you have coaching evidence, and this is where really it can get quite contentious. I think as a coach it's important to understand where your biases or your wisdom is coming from. I think it's important to understand, do you have any survivorship bias? If you actually just thrown a whole bunch of eggs against the wall and one's not cracked, and great, that's just reinforced the philosophy that you have. The reality is that philosophy isn't necessarily going to apply for everybody. And the second thing is how many athletes has a certain philosophy worked with, and how broad a spectrum. Has it been many age groupers of different age brackets and different genders, adult onset, lifetime athletes, professionals? Is it a good mixture? Is there reinforcement there? Or have you actually just got a lot of really good experience at working with one type of athlete? So having that objectivity is also important. And as an athlete, when you're working with a coach, it's also having the forthrightness to ask the question, what kind of success have you had? What kind of injury rate have you had? Any good coach should understand that you're ultimately trying to do no harm. And there's a fine line. With professional athletes, they're trying to kind of pare things down to the razor in terms of performance. But in the longer term, I think it's where your values sit will dictate whether you feel taking just that extra step of risk is worth it or not. In most cases, it just isn't. And then there's on the scientific side, when you are looking at evidence out there, whether it's from papers or it's from something that's non-endemic, that's maybe psychologically related. There's a lot of talk at the moment about grit and resilience, and a lot of work that's been done with special forces. Is that been actually applied in a very broad sense across many people, or is it very narrow? Does it have actually an applied application? Can we take that piece of information and look at it and say, okay, it provides us with some context, but not the exact answer? Or actually, can we take that information and say it's 100% applicable to the individuals that we're working with? So that's really the idea of a very evidence-led approach, and that's all that I've done over the years with the athletes that I've worked with in terms of the multiple regional championships, world titles, podiums, and I think it's what any coach should be the basis of any good coach education. Simplistically, as an athlete, a good starting point, and I always use this analogy of a house, is really you want to think about your fitness and your ability like a house. And so if you imagine you're the architect of your own house, you're building your own $1 million mansion, you want good foundations. So that's your sleep, your nutrition, your genetics. You want good structural integrity. That's your walls. That's your core conditioning. That's your mobility work, your stability work. Then you want a sound roof. That's your maximal capacity. That's your ability to have a very high turnover from a neuromuscular perspective. And then you obviously want the rooms to be able to be lived in. So the ceiling needs to be in an appropriate place. So that's your threshold. And I'm not going to label that in any way, but developing the threshold through various approaches. So if you think about your capacity in that sense, you can't build a house, focusing on just one area. If you want, a sound structural property, you need to think about all of those areas. And a simple way to do that, from my business background, is strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats analysis. Think about that from a physiological approach as an athlete. Think about that in terms of the races that you want to do. I live in Texas. It's pancake flat. Most people's small chain rings have got dust on them. Somebody there choosing to go and do a race like Ironman France or Ironman Wales, which are notoriously hilly, brings a very specific coaching and training demand that you simply can't get with the environment. So it's understanding that both from what you're targeting as your objective and where you're at that point in time yourself physically. Another big point is data. I think a big hot issue at the moment is devices. You've got coaches out there that say that devices should be thrown in the bin, you should be doing everything by feel. And the reality is, with a sport that is predominantly people that have come into the sport later in life, is races absolutely are our benchmark of success. But what you also need to understand is that whether you're a professional or an age group, or you're a competitor or you're a completer, devices are there to tell us why were we more successful in our process, or why were we not successful in our process? If you just simply don't use any devices and you're not managing the training in an appropriate way, then you've got no mechanism of actually measuring that success at the race or lack thereof. Now, when I say devices, that could just as easily be your ability to rate your training session on a perceived exertion basis, and keeping a record of that, or a record of the quality of the sleep that you get each night. Those things are still subjective, but they're still measuring tools. Another level from that, though, is your power meters, your Garmin devices. So, from my point of view, I don't think it's an either-or. I think it's a complementary scenario that can leave you in a much more informed position. And so the reality is at the end of the day, if you're looking at understanding yourself as an athlete, as a coach, understanding the athlete as a person, not just the engine, that you're then in a position to have a plan. And as the saying goes, the best laid plans are useless if you don't follow them, and the most carefully followed plans are useless if they're not right for you. So I'd encourage everybody to seek out knowledge about how you do what you do and why you do what you do, and that will lead you on a path of success. There you go. So, questions?
I have a question.
Yep.
Is there one? Could you pick out one workout that you would say, out of all the athletes that you have now or have had in the past, that is universally disliked the most? I can think of one.
Most universally disliked training by any athlete, I think, is something that takes them to the bottom of the well. So a very cognitively demanding training session is something that goes to failure. I think as a coach, that has its place. It's a useful tool, but to do it week in, week out, without fail, 52 weeks of the year, whether it's the swim training, the bike training, or the run training, is a recipe for burnout. And so it needs to be used judiciously, but it's definitely something that's universally disliked when it's used.
You mentioned grit and resilience.
Yeah.
Can you go into a little bit more?
Sure. I think, firstly, you have to understand an athlete's background. And what I mean by that is that some athletes come from a background where they very simplistically through their life have just innately acquired resilience. Others, it may be through a sporting environment. So what's interesting working with athletes and talking about rate of perceived exertion is that sometimes people can come from a sport where they've really, really pushed themselves. So a good example would be something like crew or rowing, as they say in Europe, where you may have an athlete that did that when they were younger or they were at college. And the type of training for that is very arduous and at times to exhaustion. And that can bias that sense of resilience. And somebody else that's an adult onset, maybe just never really did any sport, just been healthy and active, and comes in to... it isn't less resilient, but their scale is different. And so you have to approach the two very differently.
Yeah, thank you.
So you mentioned reaching this kind of, with coaches at some point, you're going to reach the upper limit of what the coach can provide.
Yeah.
So in your experience, typically are you firing your athletes or your athletes firing you?
I don't think there's ever a firing. I mean, there's definitely times, and I'll hold my hand up and say, I've had situations where there's been philosophical differences on the ensuing path of success. And in all those instances, just personally, it's been amicable. The reality is, though, I think as a coach, you should know your limits. And some do and some don't. And I think athletes also need to hold their coaches accountable and say, look, I'm paying you, or I'm working with you to educate me, empower me, enable my success. If we've got to a point where we're flatlining and we're not really progressing, where do we go from here? And if the coach's response or my response is, well, I've exhausted all my avenues of thought, then, as I said earlier, my job is to babysit somebody through a journey of success, and if we've reached the upper limit of what I can do, they should move on. They should seek out a different approach. Sometimes there's always the grass is greener scenario where, they feel there may be a better approach, and the reality is, what it actually is they go somewhere else and they work with a coach that says exactly what their existing coach has been saying, but just with different language. And that's a learning point for the prior coach that maybe they need to understand. They need to adjust their learning, their communication style.
Thank you. I have another question.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of certifications out there right now. USAT has theirs, Ironman has theirs, who knows what else there is. But, if I'm an athlete looking for a coach, what are one or two things I need to look for?
I think with the sport that we do, I would argue very adamantly that a basic knowledge of physiology is important. One thing I was taught from a very early age as a coach is every single training session should be able to be boiled down to this picture here. This first principles of physiology, biomechanics, neurology, or psychology, or a mix thereof. And if a coach can't explain from those four things the purpose of the training session, it's just, well, this is what you need to do, the coach doesn't know what they're doing. And there's a very famous swim coach called Bill Sweetman from Australia who would throw assistant coaches out of off the deck of British swimming if they couldn't justify from a first principles basis the training that they were doing. And so, without fail, a basic grounding in physiology should be important. Now, I can't speak to the USAT qualifications, or I've seen the Ironman certification qualifications. I had some exposure to that syllabus, and it's a good basic grounding. But we should always be seeking continuous professional development as a coach. So that would be the first thing. And then the second thing is really, can they communicate with you as an athlete? Do they listen? Do they have empathy? Do they understand?
Thank you.
And as far as, we haven't had any questions come in, but thank you, David, Bill, James, and Nate for commenting. They've said hi. So any other questions? Anyone?
I can think of one. Just
Throw it out there.
if there is no like so if an athlete approaches you, how long are you willing to carry out that conversation before you kind of close the deal, so to speak, from an athlete relationships? Like how much time do you have to commit at times to sort of?
You mean, like, how long does it take to court a relationship?
Yeah, exactly.
Bearing in mind my wife is sat there, so I'm talking about working with her. I think, certainly from my own personal experience, when I've been approached by professional athletes, they've done their homework, they've potentially spoken to other athletes, but that's something that I offer. I say, if you want to go and speak to an existing athlete, or for that matter, a past athlete, knock yourself out, no problem with that. Typically, one or two conversations. The one thing I encourage any athlete and coach to do is understand that there is always going to be teething. There's always going to be teething pain. A few weeks or months of getting the communication right, and understanding that how I communicate with one athlete isn't necessarily the same way that I communicate with another athlete. That's not to say that I'm Machiavellian, but it's actually to say that you can. Some athletes want the sergeant major, and some athletes want the sort of the empathy and the virtual hug. It's understanding what fits when. So typically a couple of conversations.
Do you have athletes that you coach that the entire relationship is long distance virtual, or do you see all of them at some point?
Over the years, I've worked with most of my athletes remotely, and then see them occasionally through the years. And that's one criticism of coaches that work virtually or remotely. And I think with the advent of Skype, you can actually look an athlete in the eye and tell whether they're not really being very honest with you from a communication perspective, or vice versa. The athlete can see whether the coach is blowing smoke where it shouldn't be blown. But the reality is from a distance, it can also provide an objectivity that being there day to day, on deck or on trackside, doesn't provide, because you can get quite wrapped up into what's going on acutely. Going back to my slide here with the clock, you can get very wrapped up in what's going on right that second, and being at a distance and teasing out the subjective feedback from an athlete, asking them to express how they felt when they did that training session, or looking at data, can also provide you with that ability to make more informed decisions. I don't think it's an either or. I think there's a time and a place for both.
Thank you.
Bill asks, he'd like to know your thoughts on strength training for triathlons, such as CrossFit or weightlifting, etc.
Okay, so the first thing I'll say is straight up front, CrossFit, throw it out the window. Just not relevant. I think on a more serious note, I think the idea of explosively moving heavy weights in an uncontrolled manner is not necessarily the greatest idea. That said, there's a whole bunch of research about things like plyometrics being really important in terms of improving running economy. There's a whole bunch of evidence around Olympic lifting being good. I use an analogy that was taught to me by a world-class strength and conditioning coach. And he uses the phrase, and he freely admits he didn't make it up either, you can't fire a cannon from a canoe. So if you are trying to express force at the end of your swim stroke, or at toe off in the end of the stride, and you have an unstable base you're trying to express that force from, then that is a lack of efficiency in movement or power production. So on the bike is a closed system. Sometimes people may have ridden with somebody that's really smooth. They're just flowing along. There's no movement in their hips at all. And that's really efficient from a mechanical perspective. You might see somebody else that's just rocking all over the place. They're leaking power out of that closed system. So does strength and conditioning or stability and mobility work have a place? Absolutely. You want to go and look at world-class athletes, world champions, Nino Schurter, mountain biking, Galen Rupp in track and field, Peter Sagan in cycling. They're all doing conditioning work. It's not voodoo. It has its place. That said, if you can only train 10 hours a week, then you need to pick your battles. I would still argue that 3 times 20 minutes a week of stability and mobility work, a 10-minute yoga routine to loosen you up, all really good to do, versus an hour of aerobic exercise.
Do you have a difference in coaching philosophy for older athletes versus younger athletes?
Well, I think philosophically, I'm still in the same place. I'm still very evidence-led. From understanding that person's motivation, aspiration, communication style, that will definitely vary. I've worked with the oldest athlete I've worked with is 65, training for an Ironman in Israel, and how I would treat him would be very different to how I treated a girl that was 14 and on the British junior squad. So understanding those different styles.
What is your approach for an athlete who has a pretty extreme weakness with one discipline? How do you balance the strength and the weakness?
It depends. It's if it's the swim, I think it's also understanding what distance do they want to race, what are their longer term objectives. If somebody came along and swim was their weakness and they said, I want to qualify for Kona in 5 years, then I'd be very upfront and say, okay, right, fine, now we need to spend 2 years really biasing your swim, because it's so much more neurologically driven. And the swim's an interesting one because there's so much neurology and psychology involved in there versus the biking and the running. If it's the biking and the running, typically what you're coming up against is either an engine that can over-torque the chassis. That's the most common example that I see, where you have people that are aerobically super talented and natural, and their body's not built for what they suddenly want to do. So a really good example of that would be somebody that comes from like a Division 1 swim background. They graduate, they work for a few years, and then they go, oh, I like this triathlon thing, I'm going to have a go at an Ironman. That individual is, biomechanically and neurologically, they're wired very, very, very differently to a runner. And so if you take that individual and go, right, off you go out the door, do your 2.5 hour long run, guarantee you're going to break them. Guarantee there's going to be an injury down the line. So then you need to then go back and say, okay, well, what do we need to revisit and develop over a period of time?
All right, Bill says thanks, and another question from him. I think I gain more from high-intensity workouts instead of long, slow distance. Do you think that high intensity can replace long, slow distance?
I don't think it can replace. There's a lot of work now about polarized training from a variety of sources. If you break down, without kind of boring maths, if you break down the kind of return on investment, training a lot around threshold is dollar for dollar, pound for pound, really expensive from a recovery point of view. And so now, what we do see, and we do realise, and it's not just myself that said this, but Joe Friel's written about it in his Faster After 50 book, that there's always a place for some high intensity work. Because the reality is you can get as good a return on investment than spending a lot of time doing sweet spot training. If you're involved in a sport, if you're doing an Ironman, you don't want to go too extreme, because if you're training for an Ironman and you're going to be on the bike for 6 hours, if the longest bike ride you ever do is 2 hours, then I think you're setting yourself up for failure. So it's a balance.
Any other questions?
All right. Well, thank you so
Thank you.
much.